Beginning the presentation, for those that don't know me, I will just tell you that I work at Tampere University. I'm a member of the gamification group and an associated senior researcher at the Center of Excellence in Game Culture Studies, also Tampere University. And I am mostly interested in urban semiotics and semiotics of play. In the last couple of years, I've been working at a Marie Curie project dedicated to the possible uses of play by the citizens to reshape urban environments. But I'm interested in every form of connection between playfulness and space. So why am I here to speak about faces? What kind of connections can exist between faces and cities and play? Well, in fact, quite many. Like in past collaboration with Facets, we discussed, for example, about facial recognition technologies in the city and how they engendered several reactions from citizens and several mutations in the urban spaces. We also mentioned, of course, as it already emerged several times in today's conference, how the use of face masks can also modify the urban landscape. And interesting enough, both these examples also have playful implementations. So we have, again, this triad between the way we use and we signify with our face and how our face has to be read in the context of our urban environment and modifies the urban environment in which the face is present. Today, however, we will move to a different kind of urban environment because I will talk to you about the video game, Cyberpunk 2077. It's a quite recent video game. It has been published just a few weeks ago. So I didn't have the time to finish it yet, despite putting in it around 50 hours of my time. And so this kind of study has to be considered a form of exploratory study, or at least, an attempt to explore some of the questions, especially regarding the faces and the representation of the faces in this game that emerged while I was playing. So just a couple of things about the game. So it is a game that has been inspired by an older tabletop pen and pencil and paper game called Cyberpunk 2020, which was a role-playing game from 1988, and whose world and setting, etc., has been quite faithfully included in Cyberpunk 2077. The game has been created by CD Projekt Red, which is one of the biggest game companies in Europe. It's based in Poland. It's quite famous for its previous series of games, The Witcher. And to give you an idea of the size of the game and of the project, realizing it has costed 215 million euros. So it was a quite important project, expensive as several Hollywood blockbusters. And it earned, as of the 31st December 2020, 500 million euros only by digital copies. So in 21 days, because the game was released the 10th of December, the game grossed €500 million. So we're speaking about very big and important cultural products that many people engage with, and they're ready to spend good money in order to play. As for what kind of game it is and why it is related to cities and to faces, it's obvious why it is related to play. It is an open world role-playing game. So let's open up a bit this definition for those of you that are not familiar with video games. So an open world game is a game that has an extremely large game map to explore. So while there is a narrative and the player follows this narrative throughout the game, there is a large environment that the player can explore freely, engaging in side quests, looking at what other people are doing, or just driving around. In the case of Cyberpunk 2077, as you might have imagined, the open world is city, is Night City. You can see here in the slide, but also in my background in Zoom. It is a city that has been reconstructed with extreme care, from consumer goods to advertisement to gangs and corporations, different kinds of vehicles, and even, for example, how augmented street signs could look like, etc. It is obviously a cyberpunk city, futuristic, but also at the same time rather dystopian. So one of the major appeals of the game is exactly the fact that we can explore, we can move in this game map and, well, interact with the city spaces. Cyberpunk 2077 is also a role-playing game, meaning that, again, as there is a sort of fixed narrative or fixed enough narrative to follow, the main character is created and interpreted by the players. So the players will be allowed to have meaningful choices that will change the outcomes of the story. So the story has several endings, I think about 17 different ones, both good ending and happy endings, not but bad ending and happy endings. And according to the choices of the character, we can, explore different potential narratives. And this is where we will see the importance of the face. So when we start the game, the first thing that we are asked to is to decide who will be the main character and to construct the main character. The name of the main character is always V, written just with the letter V, but we can choose many things about their appearance, for example, and their background. So we can choose if they are street kids, if they've been working for corporations, if they have been nomads, what kind of body type they have, what kind of voice tone, what kind of genitals, and the dimension of their genitals, and all a series of features about their bodies. And especially, there is a lot of possibilities to customize the face that your character will have. You can choose the skin tone, the skin type, the shape and dimension of the nose, style of the eyebrows, what kind of eyes or mouth you want to have, the width of your jaw, the orientation of your ears, etc. So thinking about Simona's presentation just now, it would be interesting to see how Lombroso or Aristotle would shape their face in order to create, on the basis of physiognomy and phrenology, the perfect face. What I would like to show you, however, is, let's say, the more unusual features that you can choose to characterize the face of your main character. And again, I also want to show how in the top of this image, just after settings, you have the sentence, "In Night City, looks are everything." So we have, again, a connection with the urban dimension of the game, and also the importance, like it really stresses how important it is that you choose the face of your character. So of course, the choices that you can make are not neutral. So for example, you can choose different hairstyles, but among the hairstyles you can choose, you have, for example, mohawks or the sort of punkish or transgressive hairstyle. This becomes even more clear if you choose, for example, the color of your hair and eyebrows, that you can see have a palette or rather ludicrous and unexpected colors and clearly artificial colors for your facial hair. You can choose different eye colors, different iris patterns, not only weird colors like having red eyes, but also having this sort of robotic or augmented or eyes that feature decoration that don't even really look like eyes anymore. You can then have this sort of cyberware in your face, which is purely for aesthetic functions, but to sort of highlight the idea that you're a cyborg in a cyberpunk situation. And you can have different kind of cyberware on your face. You can then have scars. You can have scars, for example, like the one in the image now that are clearly referring to a past of violence, but you can also have, for example, decorative scars covering your face. You can have facial tattoos, from this sort of typical jail inmate facial tattoos to futuristic tattoos in which you have a sort of barcode printed on your front, on your forehead. You can then have many different kinds of piercings, from simple earrings to piercing covering most of your face. And of course, you can set to whatever in between. And this piercing can also have this sort of flashy and ludicrous colors if you want to go in that direction. You can then choose to, for example, have metal teeth. You can have a golden smile, or again, you can choose for less normal colors to the metal that you cover your teeth with. And finally, you can put on all sort of kinds of makeup, regardless to whatever body type you have chosen at the beginning. So you spend quite a lot of time at the beginning of the game just crafting the face of your character and trying to take in account many little details about their appearance. So when you actually start playing the game, you might be a bit surprised that the game is in the first person, and you do not get to see the character face that you just spent so much time doing, because you see it through the eyes of your character. There are some cases in which you can actually see the face of your character, for example, when you interact with your inventory, But as you can see in the image, most of the times your face is covered by all sorts of different gear. So while I was playing the game, the question immediately arose. So why spending so much time creating a face that you cannot see in the game? So this, of course, is a question I cannot answer. This is a question we should ask the designers. But there is a different question that we can try to answer together in the rest of this presentation, which is, what is the role of the face and of face creation in the narrative of Cyberpunk 2077? What is important about creating this face in the game? Well, one possible answer would be related to the idea of world building, which is sort of a buzzword nowadays in media studies as well as in game studies. So can, creating these faces already be part of the creation of the world of Cyberpunk 2077? And well, the answer is, of course, yes, it can, because creating a textuality like this face with a series of intertextual references to Cyborg and to other elements obviously cast around itself a possible world, as I would call it, in which these sort of looks are acceptable, if not even common. However, I don't think this is a particularly important or a particularly interesting way of answering this question, because in fact, so much of the game is already devoted to world building. So much about the creation of the city and the open world that you can roam and explore freely is exactly about creating the world. So you don't really need to spend so much time creating your face if what you care about is world building. So let's try to proceed in another direction. So we have seen that there are many different things that you can control and you can add to your face while creating your character. These facial features that we are dealing with are figures. They are cultural units stable enough and deposit enough in culture to be connected to, other different semantic fields. For example, if we think about the metal golden teeth, we can immediately imagine them related to this sort of gangster, hip-hop, Latino, outlaw, inmate subcultures from the United States. And the same goes with, having facial tattoos of different kinds or artificial implants in your face. If we explore a bit the possibilities of the facial generation that are offered by the game, we also immediately see that these figures are crossed by several isotopies. They are not completely random, but we can find connections among some of them. For example, facial tattoos with writings and the golden teeth, they both go in the same direction. They are both related to this inmate subculture I just told you about. And the same goes for many of the other facial features that we have encountered. So based on these isotopies, the figures can be used to recreate several themes. So let's see what are the themes that I've been able to reconstruct clearly with this tool of facial creation. Well, the first one, of course, is punk, because you need to have punk in Cyberpunk. So you have this sort of rocker, punkish look with, skulls and mohawks and this sort of alternative underground tattoos and makeup and so on and so forth. Another one that we have already mentioned a couple of times is a sort of criminal, underdog, outlaw, inmate look that takes inspiration from several kinds of tattoos and of, for example, using scars to show that you have a violent past and these sort of things. You also have this tribal voodoo look that, well, is not really surprising if you're familiar with Gibson novels, the Sprawl trilogy, in which, for example, voodoo religion is an important part of the cyberspace. And so we have this sort of African-inspired, generally tribalistic facial features that can be used to reconstruct this sort of theme. You can also just try to create, of course, an attractive face. which might look bland compared to the other, but bring us back to another theme that is very important in Cyberpunk, that is that of attractiveness and of sexuality and of the transformation of the body in a consumer good, in prostitution and so on and so forth. And finally, of course, you have the idea of the cyborg. You have the theme of futurism, and especially of this sort of dystopian future that is ingrained and enshrined in the flesh, and in this case, in the faces of these future citizens. A sort of proof that there is indeed some isotopies and some themes that emerge from these facial features happen if we just use the tool provided by the game to just generate faces randomly. So random generated faces, as the one you're seeing in this picture or this other one, well, are quite chaotic. They are not really, the different facial elements are not used to create any meaningful isotopy, and you end up with this sort of potato look, which is very baroque, but not very meaningful. So, of course, the different themes and the different facial features related to the different themes we have seen can be combined, but they have to be combined, again, trying to build a coherent textuality, facial textuality, while the sort of random faces do not really, well, they don't really make any sense for us. So why using these themes when we create a face? Well, because face creation then becomes a way of giving a thematic role to the main character. So we can choose when we create the face of our character if we want it, or if we want them to be punk, if we want them to be cyborgs, if we want them to be attractive, if they want them to look like outlaws, and so on and so forth. This is something that most role-playing games do, but generally role-playing games do it in an explicit way. You can see in this image the races of Dungeons and Dragons, which have also different thematic roles that the players can embody in the game. You can choose to be an elf, a dwarf, a human, a gnome, and so on and so forth. However, in most role-playing games, choosing your thematic role also changes the skills, the abilities, the possibilities of your character. So if I decide to be an elf orc, I will have a bonus to strength, for example. While the facial creation in Cyberpunk 2077 does not really influence the gameplay in any way, doesn't change what your character will be able to do. So why invest in characters with thematic roles if this doesn't change anything in, well, how the game can be played? Well, thematic roles are obviously linked with what Umberto Eco defines as scripts, so this sort of classic, stereotypical narratives that are sedimented in each culture. And, well, they also embody several possible narrative programs. So if I choose to embody the theme of criminality, and so to have a criminal as a character, then I can expect, well, of course, all a series of scripts of, running away from the law, having conflict with the police, and in general, being an outlaw. And a series of narrative programs that are related to, well, criminal activities and, belonging to gangs and gang violence, etc. Same if I decide to embody the theme of the punk rocker, then there will be, also a series of narrative programs related to being against the system, being rebellious, and against being in conflict with the authority. Same if I choose to be seductive, then all form of narrative program related to sexuality and seduction will emerge. So while I create my face and I confer thematic roles to my character, a series of scripts and narrative programs will already be in the background of the face I'm creating. And it is quite interesting because when we deal with other forms of texts in semiotics, thematic roles are generally given by the author of the narrative. In this case, however, it is not the authors of the game, which are also authors of the main narrative played in the game. it's not them that decide which thematic roles will be the ones embodied by your character. They give you, of course, some possibilities to choose, but it's the player themselves. They choose which thematic roles they want to embody. And this means that when we create the face of a character, we are actually modelizing the subject of the narrative. We are conferring to this subject several modalities, for example, that of wanting to be, or that of being able to do. Again, these are not reflected per se in the game structure. You don't have different skills because of that, but your perception of the character you're creating will be oriented thanks to these modalities. And so your choices in-game, what you will decide to do inside the game, might very well be strongly oriented by your choices at the beginning of the game, the choices that you made while creating the game. So what we're seeing here is a mixed form of authorship, in which some of the modalities of the subject will be given by the game itself. For example, what the character has to do, the main quests are decided by the game and by the game developers, but some of the other modalities come from the players. The players will choose how to do something, in which order, and also to do things that are not meant by the game altogether. I can play the game and just, run over people with my car. So we have this sort of hybrid subject that is at the center of the game, whose authorship is partially in the hands of the game developers, but also partially in the hands of the player. And one of the ways the players orient and give coherence and create isotopies inside the subject is exactly this thematization, using thematic roles and figures to orient the character around several modalities. So this will bring us to the last point that I want to discuss with you, which is that face creation, therefore, if it is used to give modalities to the character, is, well, a part of the narrative. It's part of what we call the qualification of the subject. So it is not a peritextual part of the experience. It is not something that happens before we play the game. It is not something that happens, it is not something that happens before the narrative, but it is an integral part of the narrative. The game has already started, and the narration has already started in the moment in which we create the face of a character. And this, in a way, can also explain why we don't really need to see this face again, not that much in the game. Because the purpose of the face creation, the benefit that we can gain as players and that the narrative gets from the face creation is in the creation of the face itself, and not that much in the final product. So exploring the possibilities and deciding which themes and which thematic roles we want to use in our characters, and in this way orienting which modalities we want our main character to have, is already the start of our narrative. So with this brief overview, which I hope was clear also for, I guess, most of you that haven't played the game and maybe are not that familiar with games, but I wanted exactly to sort of connect with this semiotic richness of faces that we have discussed in, well, all the presentations today. And on this idea that faces are somewhat related to the identity of their wearers, which is something that becomes, again, it's really naturalized and in a way almost ideological also in how it is presented by the game, right? Deciding how you look is deciding who your player will be. It's the thing you have most freedom to decide in the creation of your character. How it can be well used, and it can become a resource in emerging forms of media like video games, and how, in a way, problematizing and analyzing how video games make use of the face can also give us some insights in how we culturally and semiotically frame faces in our cultures. And that's all with my presentation. Thank you very much. I will leave you with the ugliest face I found with the random creation of characters in Cyberpunk.